Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Sorry if you can hear the bread maker whirring in the background. I'm making pizza dough because it's pizza night, but we're not talking about pizza today. Today I'm going to answer a couple of questions I got about flour and the different flours we use. So I didn't realize, well, I suppose I did realize, but not everyone has the same knowledge base. Not everyone knows the same things. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions I got about flour over the last few days. First of all, I was asked rye flour. That's what this one is. I have them in different bowls just so you can automatically tell which one's supposed to be which. So the one in the blue bowl is rye flour. So, somebody asked me, what part of the wheat plant does rye flour come from? Rye flour doesn't come from wheat at all. Rye flour comes from rye, the rye plant. So, all grains, whether it's rye, barley, oat, wheat, rice, corn, they can all be ground up into a flour. Really, all flour itself is the grain ground into a very fine powdery substance. That's what flour is. So this is rye flour. There is no wheat in rye flour, okay? Because wheat is it comes from a wheat plant. Rye comes from a rye plant. So rye flour has nothing to do with either whole wheat or white flour. Okay? That's rye flour. The next questions I was asked are about wheat flour. These are both wheat flours. This is what we call all-purpose or white flour. That's whole wheat flour. They are both wheat flours because they both come from the wheat plant. Okay? When we say flour, we mean typically this, the all-purpose white flour. That's generally what we mean when we say flour. But flour can apply to pretty much any grain that has been ground into a flour. But generally, when people say flour, this is what they mean. When they say whole wheat, they definitely mean this. So what is the difference between whole wheat and all-purpose flour? All-purpose is only the endosperm, the center of the grain, that light white part of the grain. That's what this is. It produces a fluffier, lighter, just less dense bread than your whole wheats will. However, it has slightly less nutritional value than whole wheat. Only slightly less. People will try and tell you that there's a big difference. There's a small difference. Little tiny difference between this flour and that flour in regards to nutritional value. Whole wheat flour uses the entire grain. It, yes, uses the endosperm, same as here, but it also uses the wheat germ and the bran. Gives you a darker color, and yes, a slightly higher nutritional value. Okay, this also has a nuttier flavor. It does produce a denser, less fluffy loaf. Okay, it has a little bit, it's just a heavier flour, okay? But this has a nutty flavor that I really do like. Now, to be fair, I've never met a flour I don't like. I love all bread, so whether you make the bread with whole wheat or white, I'm there. I just love them. So you pick what you like the best. This does have a nuttier flavor, and it will give you a denser loaf. It might take longer rise time. You might have to add a little more water or a little more sugar to your dough. This gives you that traditional, light, fluffy bread that we all expect. They're both great. Another question I was asked is, why do you keep saying all-purpose flour? Why don't you tell people to use bread flour? People should use bread flour. And that's when I came to a realization. It was something I'd known, but I hadn't really paid attention to. I'm Canadian. I know, big surprise. I'm Canadian. I was born and raised in Canada. So, I know that sounds idiotic, but I knew that American all-purpose flour was different than Canadian all-purpose flour, but I hadn't really thought about it. So, American all-purpose flour is lower in protein and gluten. It's kind of like the UK plain flour. It's made from a softer wheat, so it doesn't make the greatest bread, the all-purpose flour in the United States. You can still use it. It just doesn't make the greatest bread. It's a little bit denser, just not as fluffy. So you'll get, if you use exactly the same amount of all-purpose flour in Canadian and American flours, you will get a denser loaf if you're in the United States. So yeah, a lot of people in the United States use a bread flour instead. Okay. I actually recommend you do that if you're in the United States. You can still use all-purpose flour, okay? So if you're in the US, you might have a better result if you use a bread flour, but you can still use all-purpose. Canadian flour comes from the hard red wheat, okay? It's a specific type of wheat that we grow here in Canada, sometimes called hard winter wheat. It grows all over, everyone grows it here. Our field is farmed for that. So at least our far field, our near field is just grass hay. But our far field is being farmed for winter wheat right now. So we use the hard red wheat or the winter wheat. It's higher in protein, higher in gluten. It produces a lighter, fluffier bread. So bread flour is less of a thing here. Yeah, some stores will have something called bread flour, but it's not actually any different. I've used it. It's identical. We do have a cake flour. Our cake flour is just all-purpose flour that has been sifted several times. So instead of buying cake flour, what everyone here does is we just take our all-purpose flour and sift the heck out of it till it's light and fluffy and then use it in angel food cakes and stuff like that. So there is a difference. When I say all-purpose flour, I mean in Canada we do use all-purpose flour because we can. So if you're in the US, you might have better results if you use a bread flour, but you can absolutely still use an all-purpose flour. You might want to give it a sift or two just to make sure that it's kind of lighter and fluffier. That won't change the protein content or the gluten content, but it'll still get you slightly better results. But honestly, if you've been using all-purpose flour to make bread all your life in the United States, it probably doesn't make a difference to you at this point because you're probably quite satisfied with the bread you've been producing. I do know some people from the United States who come to Canada specifically to buy our flour, bakers mostly. And there's a reason for that, but in general, you can just use what's available to you. So if you don't have bread flour, try sifting it a little bit. You might want to take out of a cup of all-purpose flour, take about a tablespoon of flour out and add a tablespoon of cornstarch in and sift all that together. That'll give you even a lighter flour. So you can try things like that, or you can just use all-purpose flour. It's not really that big a deal. So that is all I was going to talk about today because I did keep getting questions about flour. So I hope that answers a couple of the burning questions. If you have other questions about flour, feel free to message me or leave a comment if you need to. But that's about all I have to say about flour today. Those are the three main flours I use: whole wheat, all-purpose, and rye. You can, of course, use many, many other flours in your breads. This is just what's most typical. I do some recipes that have other breads, so other flours, so watch for them. But in the meantime, we are going to sign off for today. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.